troubles knowing who was his friend and who wasn't. You know, he experienced brothers that didn't like him. He experienced loneliness. He experienced death of friends. He experienced living it rough. He experienced the joy and the sorrows of children. Nowhere to call home. Nowhere to get the pizza delivered to. He had to hide in the mountains and live in a cave. You know, we took the Pathfinders caving once in Vic Park Church, and we went caving. There's not much light in there, is there? It is dark. And they went and lived in there. I'm sure they had lights. You know, they went and turned the power on at the switchboard and put the circuit breakers on, turned the electricity on, got the water running. Have you lived in a cave where it's pitch black? Have you experienced that loneliness of pitch blackness as well? There's a lot of pages, but there's big print. You know, because he respected God and he respected Saul, even when he tried to kill him, he experienced God's guidance. You know, when we have troubles and we've had spears thrown at us, or you couldn't trust your best friend, God was there for him, and he's there for you. He even had to hide in a cave with the unknowing king, the guy that wanted to kill him, next to him. I'm sure they weren't like that far apart, but he got that close to cutting a piece of cloth off the king's coat. You know that cave stunk because it was used for putting sheep in at night. It would have been ponging. And David's in there with him going, trying to cut a piece of cloth off. But God was with him. Saul could have woken, couldn't he? He could have jabbed him. Saul didn't know how close he was to dying. Have you been that close? It's then that Saul realises that God had left him and David would be with him. Because what happened? David stands outside the cave after the king went out and he calls out and he says, "Look what I got. You didn't even know I was that close to you. But I'm not going to touch you," because God had ordained him as the king. Could you do that? Could I do that? The guy that wants to kill you, and he's proven it more than once, and he respected what God had ordained. You know, the caves that they're talking about is called in the wilderness of Moan. And it's called a wadi in in Arabic, but in Hebrew it's called the spring of the young goat or fountain of the kid. The area was 2.5 kilometres from the sea, 610 metres high. Bluff Knoll's 2,000. These guys are only 600. They were hiding in the valley there because it was full of caves, gullies where the water would run. So they went into there. It's south of Hebron. And Saul forced to abandon his pursuit of David in that area because the Philistines had decided to attack. I wonder why. Do you think God might have had something to do with that? In 1 Samuel 24, let's have a look at that. 24 verse 1. And we'll read through the story there. This is just talking about what happened in that cave. He came to the sheep pens along the way, and a cave was there, and Saul went in to relieve himself, and David and his men were back at the cave. In verse 5, afterwards David was conscience-stricken for having cut off the corner of his robe. David felt sorry that he did it. In verse 6, he said to his men, "The Lord forbid that I should do such a thing to my master. The Lord's anointed, or lay my hand on him, for he is the anointed of the Lord." And verse 7, it says, with those words David sharply rebuked his men and did not allow them to attack Saul. And Saul left the cave. Could you imagine it? The guy's in the cave with him. There he is. We can get him now. God, it won't be hard. He's just, come on. That's what he's our enemy. Have you been inclined to do something to somebody that isn't doing the right thing by you? He shows Saul what he could have done to him. And so Saul calls him back in verse 16. He says, with Saul calling back to David, saying he would not harm him, but David didn't trust him. He'd proved himself more than once that he could not be trusted, Saul. Then in 1 Samuel 25, verse 7, it says, we find King Saul decides to have a go at David again. So Saul says, I won't touch you. No, it's okay. Come back home. Come back to us, your family. And David said, catch you later, sunshine. I'm out of here. And then a short time later, Saul's got it in for David again. Let's have a look at 1 Samuel 25, verse 7. And we're looking for, that's right, the story. So this is another one. They're camped out in the bush, right? They're all in there sleeping away, having a great time. David and one other man snuck down into the enemy, the guy that wants to kill him, sneaks down to him and takes, what does he take? Pitcher of water and the spear. Quietly goes back out. Now, where were the guards? The head guard was sleeping next to Saul. So where were the guys out in the camp keeping an eye on it so they don't get attacked? It says God made them so they couldn't see David coming down and sneaking in. Who was with David that night? God. So what does he do? He goes across the valley. David walks up the hill a bit and says, hey, Saul, I'm here. And you can imagine all the people gathering around, getting their armour and everything. And David holds up the spear in the water and says to them, look how close I got to you. We're using a little bit of poetic licence here. Look how close I got to killing you, and I didn't. In 2 Samuel chapter 1, it says that Saul died. In verse 11, let's have a look at 2 Samuel chapter 1, verse 11. Where are we? It says, "Then David and all the men with him took hold of their clothes and tore them." They'd just been told that King Saul had died. His arch enemy had just died. Wouldn't you be chucking a party? Having a great, hey, Saul's gone. And what does David do? He grieves over the death. Verse 12 says, "They mourned and wept and fasted till evening for Saul and his son Jonathan and for the army of the Israelites, because they had fallen by the sword." They had been defeated, wiped right out, Saul's army. So here we are. David's now got rid of his biggest headache, Saul. So let's look at David's life. You know, David sees Bathsheba. He gets a knock on the door later on and David finds out he's a dad. So what does he do? He calls Uriah, which is the husband of Bathsheba, and sends him back out to battle. But Uriah comes home. So David says to him, "Okay, look, go home and spend the night with your wife. You know, you've got to go back out to battle tomorrow. Go home and see your wife," hoping that the child wouldn't be his and it would be Uriah's. Didn't quite go that way, did it? So he sends him back out to battle. But Uriah decided not to go home, but stay with his men and be part of that group that's going off to battle the next day. So that stuffed up that plan, didn't it? So he tries again and he invites Uriah to his house, David does, and gets him drunk, thinking he'd go back home and find his wife again. That didn't work either. So what does he do? He then sends him off and gets him killed, puts him in the front line. You know, David's kids gave him a hard time. There was the death of Bathsheba's child. Then they had Solomon. Then there was his cousin Amon, who wanted his sister, or his son, and he wanted his stepsister. He pretends to be sick, this guy, and lies to his dad. Absalom, one of his other sons, starts trouble with the family. Absalom tries to take control of Israel. You know, who's the king here? David. God had made him that. David anoints Solomon as king to stop the uprising of Absalom. By the rights, should have been king, because Absalom was the first son, but God had told David that Solomon was to be the next king. Absalom dies and David returns to Jerusalem. There are many battles that David won with God's help. He wouldn't tackle anything without God. He went and got the ark, brought it out of hiding, brought it into Jerusalem, couldn't build a temple for it because God said, you've been a bit naughty. So he builds a special tent for it. He designs the new temple but can't start building it. Would you do that? You know, if God said to you, don't do that, and you go ahead and do it. You know, David was the king. He could have said to the guys, here, look, there's the plan, start building this thing. But God said, no way. We all go through emotions. Things go wrong. Life is full of ups and downs. You could have been on a prison ship. You could have got whipped, or you could have been having javelins thrown at you. You're not alone. But could you imagine being David, being tested all the time? Everything he said, everything he did, he was being tested, just like Jesus was. Are you being tested today? Psalms 13 verse 1. It says, "How long, Lord, will you forget me forever? How long will you hide your face from me? How long must I wrestle with my thoughts, and day after day have sorrow in my heart? How long will my enemy triumph over me?" Can you relate to those verses? Think about it. How long, Lord, will you forget me forever? And he still stayed solid to God. Yeah, he mucked up. He made mistakes. We all do, don't we? Have you not made a mistake this week? You haven't. You've been good. No, Granddad's saying you're not. You're not alone. David's story and those are there to encourage us. The book is full of encouragement, the Bible is. The Bible is full of stories and others who have been there, done that, and God brought them through it all. All through David's trials, God did not forget him, even when he strayed from God. God was always just there waiting for David and me to call out. David started off right. He was the king. He was a kid and got told he's going to be the next king. Wow. He went and killed lions and bears and giants. He had to go and live in the rough. He had to experience things that most of us would never, ever experience. But he finally came back to God. What about you? You don't have to do whatever you're doing and struggle alone. You're not alone. Ask someone for help. You know, we're a community here in Swan Valley. And as a community, we need to support each other. But there's no good doing that if you don't invite God to help you. You can get all the best advice in the world from your friends, but if you don't have the advice from God, you've got nothing. Have you forgotten what God has done for you? Have you looked back in your life and looked where he's helped you? Has life seemed so bad that you can't see a way out? Have you been that low? If you've forgotten God, come back to God. He hasn't left you.